What's up, Westside? This is Joe Reese, longtime Westside residents here, hosting the podcast here for Wesco, and today we will be talking about safe housing tenant protections. With me in studio, I will have them introduce themselves, and we'll start over here.
Hey everyone, I'm Trom. I'm a renter in St. Paul and with the Alliance as a policy advocate.
Hey everyone, this is Sebastian with Wesco with the Housing Justice team. We're working with tenants every day on the ground here on the west side.
Hey y'all, this is Danielle with the Frogtown Neighborhood Association. I am an anti-displacement community organizer and do work with these people, usually. Yeah.
Every day, all the time.
Awesome. Well, welcome everybody. Why don't you go ahead and give us a little rundown on what we're going to be talking about?
So today we are going to be talking about the safe housing tenant protections that are getting to be rolled out in the city of St. Paul. And there are 5. Tenant rights and responsibility information, security deposit limits, tenant screening guidelines, just cause notice, advance notice of sale. So if you don't pay attention to this stuff every day like we do, you might not know exactly what that means. So we're going to go in and talk about each one of these ordinances in depth just a little bit to give you guys some background. Responsibility information, that's really just about landlords giving out a physical packet to tenants to inform them of their rights and responsibilities, which is pretty basic. We have that in our writing form from the Attorney General as it is now, but it's still helpful. Some of the other ones are a little bit more in depth, so I think we'll talk more in depth about them.
Yeah, maybe we can start off just by talking about how we need these protections, who in St. Paul is going to benefit from them, and just thinking about all the St. Paul that are renters, all the folks in St. Paul that are cost burdened and who have to deal with such inhumane and inequitable housing conditions. I know we have some stats, but just to kind of get us in this mindset of who's benefiting from this, who's really impacted by the lack of these tenant protections currently. I know we've often cited this statistic that 51% of the people living in St. Paul are renters, and we also know that renters are the most diverse group of St. Paulites, right? Not just by race, but also income, age, the length of time that they have lived in St. Paul, family status. Renters are what make the city beautiful, right? They work everywhere in our city. There are students, there are elders that we care for, there are teachers, there are nurses, they are the lifeblood of this community, and we got to make sure that we've got laws in place that really protect the rights of all of our renters.
You bring up a really good point, Trom, about the diversity of neighborhoods. I think one interesting thing about Frogtown and the West Side is that we are very diverse, and so oftentimes we find ourselves working alongside each other, much like with this podcast, and sharing ideas about how we can help encourage these tenant protections to be passed. So definitely want to shout out to our sister council, the West Side. Very happy to be here alongside you guys, talking about this stuff and how we can inform our communities of how helpful they can be, and kind of debunk some of the myths that are out there too.
Should we go into process first and then maybe go dive deeper into what's the impact of this legislation?
Sure. So the process of passing the ordinances, well, we did some community engagement with the city. They held several community engagement sessions. Many of us were at many of them. Many tenants were there, landlords were there. And now we finally gotten to a point that through the city attorneys, we have official language for these ordinances to come through, and they have been submitted and they've been released in public. So it's like the go live button has been hit, and they've been released out into the public. They have kind of generated some activity from landlords, and we've had the first hearing on these ordinances. So there will be 3 hearings before the city council with these ordinances, and after the 3rd one, then there will be a public hearing where a community can come and have say on the record about how we feel about it. So right now we've had the first hearing, and just waiting to go through that process and show up for the public hearing.
You went to the first one?
You were there, right?
I did. They went through the agenda really quickly, so I got there right after they read it. But I know from seeing the room that there were a few homeowners that showed up. It was also a busy, like, reasons to some trash folks. But it went through really quickly, right? There were no amendments proposed. It was just an acknowledgement that these ordinances have been proposed. And then that was last Wednesday. The second reading is going to be next Wednesday at 3:30 p.m. in City Hall. And then I think the public hearing is scheduled for April 1st.
Yep.
No joke.
Hashtag no joke.
So for all community members that want to show up to this, I think it's best to show up about 10 to 15 minutes earlier because we know that the agenda is kind of fast. And also it gives you a little bit of time to also see who's in the room and maybe get a read of it. I think it's important for community members to come out and see that, to see who's making decisions for us and whose decisions are impacting our neighborhood, you know. And when you show up to things like this, you kind of have a visual representation of what that looks like often.
Yeah, I think like with the process, probably a few years ago, I had no idea what a city council person even was responsible for. So if you're someone who is not tied in politically or participating in like the civic engagement process, our city council is setting laws every day. So laws about like these ones that we're going to be going over, for example, who can say what's stopping you from getting into an apartment? Our city council people have the ability to change those laws. And so it's a big deal. We talk about politics on a national level. We know that that's a big deal, but it's sometimes overlooked on how big of a deal our local level politics really play a day-to-day in our, or play a role in our day-to-day life. So like we're talking every day, what's making it difficult for you? What's making it, getting to work, how much your wages are, all of those things land at city council. And we have access to our representatives, and showing up and telling them, emailing them is a way to really influence what our day-to-day lives look like. So there's a lot of power in showing up for things like this, even though it seems small.
And I do want to add to your point, like you said, there are our representatives, right? These folks represent our power, represent our communities. Therefore, it's in our power as an individual that lives in the ward that they reside on to voice yourself and to voice your opinions as much as you can, actually.
For sure.
So, hi, this is Monica here with Wesco, and I'm just going to jump in really quick. And today we're talking about the tenant rights and responsibilities and slate of tenant protections that are coming to pass. So if you're a renter, if you rent in the city of St. Paul, such as myself and a few other folks here around this table, why does it matter to you? So we're going to start off with this first one, which is a tenant's rights and responsibility information packet. And it seems like a no-brainer, right? Like you're going to sign a legal binding contract with the person about the place that you and your family are going to live in. And that legal binding contract, you should know what your rights are. But up to this point, there really hasn't anything been placed in ordinance or law that says, here, we have to give you this information. So this is a packet that says, here's what your rights are, and it's both for responsibilities and rights as tenants and also for landlords. So that's one thing that's changing. If you start renting this spring someplace, or if you change rental locations, you should be getting a packet that explains what your rights and responsibilities are. If you're not, then that's something we need to talk about. So we consider that kind of like a no-brainer, like this is low-hanging fruit, and it also isn't happening, and that's why it's sitting here on this platform. So let's talk about the second one, security deposit limit. And I think it would be helpful just to like read it and then maybe just talk a little bit about like its challenges and the opportunities it brings to ensure that tenants are protected.
Sure, I can read it. The security deposit limitation policy ensures equitable access to housing by ensuring tenants will not be required to pay more than a single month's rent as a security deposit. It also includes a prepaid rent limitation that ensures tenants will not be required to prepay more than 1 month's rent at move-in. So basically it's saying that I can pay my first month's rent and a security deposit equivalent to my first month's rent, and that's it, right?
Yeah.
This one is a big one for me. The last time I moved, I was like recently divorced, to put my business out there, I guess, and a single mom, and I was first jumping into self-employment, so I didn't have a lot of money, and I was like in a new place. Moving was extremely expensive, and my credit score had taken a hit because I had lost my house in foreclosure some years before that. So like I had been experiencing displacement, and my credit score wasn't great. And to move in, it was looking like $4,500 to pay like an increased security deposit and the first month's rent, and it was I just didn't have $5,000. Which landed me in a slum, and I lived there for a couple of years. So it's one of those things, and thankfully I wasn't in a position where I was homeless for too long. I was couch surfing for a couple of weeks because the way that my leases worked out. But some people don't find another place. So it could be real helpful.
So something that I would like to add, I think this will help a lot. Something that we see throughout the metro area is that when there's an affluent neighborhood and a poor neighborhood that are next to, adjacent to one another, often the security deposits of that richer neighborhood might be a lot higher because it's a barrier that keeps those folks from the neighborhood that's nearby from renting there. And so this actually will allow folks to move a little more freely and have the ability to rent in places where they weren't able before because they had these barriers that were put, Me personally, I see it quite a lot in Minneapolis on the north side. There's this new part of town called the North Loop, which is like close to downtown Minneapolis, but very close to North Minneapolis. And the price ranges of security deposit before Minneapolis passed this legislation were like 5 to 6 times higher. And the rent was exactly the same in a lot of places where you pay the same rent, but your security deposit was higher. So I think this is going to be really nice to implement it and kind of get it over with because it makes sense. It's logical.
Yeah, it blows my mind that there's currently no limit to a security deposit, right? Like, it's low-hanging fruit because it's just the most logical thing, right? We think about all the people, 59% of Americans who are living paycheck to paycheck, and we know that's higher for renter households. We know that's higher for communities of color. We know that's higher for folks on fixed income. That's families. So I just can't believe that this isn't a law already, right? And it's really punishing folks for a systemic issue, which is that wages aren't high enough and people can't save up money. And so what I'm supposed to, if I'm working month to month and I'm taking care of my family, but I can't save up for $5,000 in a security deposit and first and last month's rent, like that is punishing me for something that I'm not doing wrong, right? I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm working my job. It happens to be low wage. That's not my fault.
Right.
And so I think this is a really good way to start tackling, start helping households overcome those barriers, because at the federal level, we're probably not going to see any changes to minimum wage. We're seeing some of that in St. Paul, but if we really want to help folks get past the barrier of, not being able to save up, then this is one of the ways that we can do that.
I especially appreciate this security deposit limit because we're talking to West Side families every week, and some long-term that have been here 10 years in their places, so they've raised their kids here and suddenly have to move because the landlords decided, I'm going to do something different with this property. And so now, months later, they're still staying with friends and family while they're trying to save up that deposit. It's not coincident or by accident that these things are happening, and it's really important that we put some measures in place that are going to keep families in the neighborhoods that they've been a part of and contributing.
Just want to bring, this is one thing I have heard as an argument from landlords. You know, I have talked to lots of landlords while doing tenant organizing work. And their argument is that security deposits give them a cushion to make repairs, when to turn the apartment, X, Y, and Z. But the city is also providing something along with the security deposit limit, where if the landlord, if they have property damage or they need to tap into funds, there is a funding source that's available for landlords in that instance. So they were not ignorant to that fact, and they did provide a tool to address that. So that's one thing to point out, because I think that it is fair to address those concerns, and it has been addressed in that way. So
that landlord mitigation fund.
Yep. So the next one is tenant screening guidelines. The tenant screening guidelines policy ensures fair access to housing by creating uniform screening criteria for applicants related to rental, criminal, and credit history. That's a big one. I think that's a big one, especially within Black community. You know, in a lot of different work areas, we see disparities among by race. You know. One of them being who's getting arrested, who's going to prison most frequently, and sometimes while even innocent. We know that racial profiling exists. We've done research with the University of Minnesota, or Kira out of the U, and we know that Black people are getting pulled over more often. We know that they're having more interactions with police on the streets. So what does that mean for your criminal background? You know. So that's one, my mind always goes there. The argument about the tenant screenings being like, I don't want to live next to someone dangerous. Most of the time, those crimes are not violent crimes. So I think that's one thing to keep in. It's a lot of times it's crimes that are related towards how am I going to make money? It goes back to this issue of poverty, again, which is what I think we're really talking about. We're not talking about people, we're talking about poverty. And so to say, like, you know, I don't want to live next to those people, to me is what I hear through those dog whistle politics is I don't want to live next to Black people, you know. And I think you kind of get a side eye when you come out so blatantly and say it. But I think that we're at a point where we don't have time to be passive and we have to be blatant. Like, who are we really talking about when we're saying that?
Yeah.
You know?
I think unseen consequence of having or not having a legislation like this, an ordinance like this, is often we see pockets of people that have been incarcerated previously that all live in the same building or live all in a concentrated area, because there might be one or two landlords that will take them in the city and that's it. Because often maybe they committed a crime 10, 15 years ago and they're a completely new whole person now. But despite that, they're being discriminated when they apply to housing, you know? And so I think something to keep in mind, and also to counter that narrative, is that what we're doing right now is forcing the less fortunate people that are really struggling financially to live among ex-convicted felons all together, all in the same building, all the time, because they are the ones that are really at need right now. And there's this law that doesn't exist right now, and therefore they're being discriminated and being put together. So I think it's very important to keep that in mind, because often that's going to be like the first argument is I don't want an ex-murderer or an arson or someone that went to jail for arson to live next to me. But if we, in my opinion, if we actually give the ability for those people to kind of seek a home wherever they want to throughout the city, and they spread out, they have the ability to see a new environment, to push themselves to higher heights, instead of being in the same negative environment that probably pushed them to that, to commit those crimes in the first place, you know? So why have them all concentrated, and why have them remind themselves, you know, of the struggles that they've had to go through in life, when we can give them the ability to live anywhere?
Yeah, there's another point too that you bring up. I've talked to many young men who have expressed interest in wanting to get away from that lifestyle and that those ties, because a lot of times when you come up, it's your environment. That's what's around.
You.
And there are people who want to remove themselves from that and who can't. There's nowhere for them to go. And so you end up getting caught up in it, because when if you're a young man and at some point you're caught up in something and you decide that you want out, everybody on the outside doesn't decide, okay, well, you're out now. That's a decision for yourself. You know, how do you really remove yourself from that if you can't physically remove yourself from that?
Yeah, excuse me. I think a lot of landlords cite like recidivism statistics when they talk about, well, people recommit crimes. And I think what we miss in that is that our society and our infrastructure is designed to create high recidivism rates, right? If we continue to exclude people from employment by making them check a box, if we continue to exclude people from voting because they have committed a crime, if we continue to exclude people from housing, like those are all the things that we need to reintegrate into a society. And our society is really not being accepting and supporting of anyone who has gone through the criminal justice system or criminal injustice system, right? And so if we continue to uphold those forms of discrimination, why would we see a low recidivism rate, right? These are the kind of barriers that really need to be knocked down so that people can return to society and live the lives that they want to live.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone, for that. Everyone's comments. It gets deep quick because we see that these are intersections into larger issues on our quality of life, and it matters. This is why the difference of a mile makes where we live. Our chances and opportunities for success and our opportunities for a thriving neighborhood matter. And the smallest things that we can do to implement in policy and in practice can make a difference. So let's look at the just... Oh, sure, absolutely.
I just wanted to add one more thing about tenant screening guidelines, especially in relation to credit history. I think there's so many layers to consider when we think about what creates a credit score, right? Not only have, we know through the history of our nation that there have been so many exclusionary practices, not only in the financial industry, but in the housing industry, that have led to the exclusion of Black folks specifically from achieving, the kind of credit history that is ideal, quote unquote, right? And so just thinking about that, and also, like, my parents are immigrants from Southeast Asia, right? We come from places where government is not trusted. Banking institutions are not trusted. And so some immigrants, I'm not speaking for all, but some immigrants might not trust a bank to hold their money in, right? That's a real experience. And I think when we think about immigrants and refugees and the ways that they interact with government due to trauma from past experiences, really have to consider, like, if we're using credit score or credit history as basically as a way to qualify people for housing, but we don't take into account that that's not a part of everyone's history, we're really excluding a huge portion of the population from accessing housing.
I just want to say to your point real quick, I grew up in a culture where if you don't have it, you don't buy it. That's what my parents, my grandparents, and most of the people that I know always said. You don't have the money, you can't buy that thing. It's as simple as that. Therefore, when they come to this country and you introduce credit, that's a completely foreign concept for a lot of people. And in today's society, credit it's almost a requirement for you to be part of today's society, right? That's why you build credit when you go to college. That's why you build credit when even to put gas. You hear, like, if you get a credit card, they tell you, hey, build credit slowly by, putting gas and blah, 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 and do it this way. But it's an American white system that was created to create wealth in American white societies. Or at least it's perceived that way. The reality is that it was meant to create debt. That's what it is. But I think our communities know that well because they come from history of colonialism, which created a debt in their countries, and they've had to work hard to pay that debt up. Therefore, most of the time, they know that, that's why I grew up with the mentality and I was brought up with the mentality of if you don't have it, you don't buy it, because we're not gonna owe anything to anyone. It's the work that you've done, achieve that, right? And so that's kind of interesting to see how just simple mindsets like this really keep folks from having housing.
Yeah.
Can I add one thing?
Yeah.
From personal experience, I had a friend of mine who got sick and she couldn't like pay off her student loans or something. So her credit score had like really hits, and she wasn't able to like rent out when she actually graduated because of this. And she had to stay like at her parents' house for like 3 years just to build up her credit. So it changed a lot of things.
Yeah, and that's a whole nother aspect too, is home ownership. So before just doing tenant organizing, I've sold houses. One of the biggest barriers for young people, for people, however you want to define young as, I say young, to purchase is student loans. Student loan debt is like one of the number one things that gets in the way of homes. And I feel like we're veering into like capitalism almost. So
We can go back to
right. So just cause notice. Let's see. The just cause notice policy increases housing stability by ensuring landlords provide just cause for non-renewal of lease or termination of tenancy at the time notice is given. Just cause includes non-payment of rent, repeated late payment of rent, among other criteria. So basically what just cause is saying is that you can't just not renew someone's lease. You have to have a cause that is just. And so I think that's, there is a lot of pushback with this one. The important factor is that there is a just cause. You, landlord, if you have a justified reason on why you feel like you shouldn't have to renew the lease, for example, your tenant is always paying their rent late, that is a just cause. That's listed under just cause notice. So we're not tying your arms in ways that's sticking you in a way that's gonna disadvantage you. So just important little sidebar with that one.
And I would like to add, we want tenants to live in buildings. We want people to have homes. Therefore, we're not advocating against you in any way. Actually, we want to work with you.
Period.
You consider yourself a housing provider because that's what you are. Therefore, we want to make sure that all of the benefits that you receive as a housing provider are also trickled down to the benefits of the tenants that give you the money to create your affluence. It's as simple as that.
For sure.
Yeah. And I think the nice thing about Just Cause is it just creates a more humane housing system, right? Right now, I could get a notice and for no reason that I'm aware of, be forced to move from my apartment in 30 days. And that's terrifying, right? The stress, the trauma that creates. This is happening to people all across our city and all across the country, but especially across our city. And to be given a reason, it just changes everything because we know that sometimes non-renewals are due to, maybe a landlord thinks they can charge more for rent, and so they're just gonna, not renew so they can get new folks to move in. Sometimes it's racially motivated. Sometimes it's, this person has too many kids. I don't want to risk getting my property damaged because we make assumptions about how kids behave in buildings. But also, just cause is a protection for landlords because when you give a reason, and there are many reasons that the city lists, there's like 10 of them, it protects you from a lawsuit, right? If you can document and state a reason to your tenant and it's backed up by city law, then, that's just built into law. It's a protection for you as a landlord.
It's true. Okay, so advance notice of sale. The advance notice of sale policy supports the preservation of affordable housing and addresses displacement pressures tenants face. It ensures that a notice of a proposed sale be provided to the city and tenant before an affordable property is placed on the market, as well as after the transfer of ownership occurs, coupled with a tenant protections period after the sale. That's a mouthful.
Yeah.
So basically, if your landlord is selling their home, they have to give the city a heads up, and they have to give you a heads up so that you can begin searching if you have to.
Yeah, and this doesn't prevent a property owner from selling their building at all, right? It just creates, and this is again a humane housing system where someone has adequate notice to move their whole family, right? Maybe it's, it's first of all having to find a new place, having to get the money together for a new deposit,
Right.
having to figure out how you're going to move all your stuff, when you're going to do it. Maybe it has to do with moving your kids into a different school, which is a huge transition. It's just so many factors. Moving is not just about like physical moving, right? It's moving your community, it's moving your relationships and all the spaces that you occupy. So I think advanced notice of sale is just giving people time to transition, to change, because currently, if your building gets sold, there's not much you can do to stop it. But at least we can
They don't
be
even let you
given.
know.
Right. Sometimes it's like our building is sold, you got 30 days. That's crazy. And so if we can give people the time to make that transition, it's still going to be stressful. It's still going to be
Right.
a ton of work and unfair, but at least they have the time to do that for themselves.
And these are not ordinances and protections that just came out of thin air. This is based upon lots of community engagement and outreach, and what we are seeing in real time. So, this market is tied to lots of development that's happening. Our city is growing, and we are seeing a lot of changes. And there is being investment that is made from everything like to the Allianz field, to the Green Line. We're going to get a whole new development in where the Sears location was. Walmart is going to be torn down and rebuilt. All of this generates market value for properties around it. And so we see people selling. It's just like with stocks, right? Like when your stocks are up high, sell. And so people are selling, and whole apartment buildings are selling. And it's with that change of ownership. Especially if, say, for example, the last time that apartment building sold, it sold for $2 million. And now, because the market is inflated, that same building is worth $10 million. And the new owner is not paying a $2 million mortgage. They're paying a $10 million mortgage. And so the rents are going to be increased so that they can still make a return on their investment. So when we see these sales happening, which is happening a lot, we're seeing rental increases because the purchase prices are much higher than they have been. So this is a trend that has been happening across both cities, to Minneapolis and St. Paul, and across the nation. So again, these are not just kind of like out of left field. These are real experiences that we hear happening to community members every day.
I would like to add, so I'm currently working on a building here on Stevens, on the west side. And I have residents that have been living there for about 10 years, and I have others that have been living there for about 4 to 5. And the ones that have been living there for 4 to 5 years have told me that they've gotten about 2 new owners. Come to find out from the tenants that have been living there for a while, the building has changed ownership in the past 8 years 4 times. So that building has been sold and resold multiple times without letting anyone know. Last week we had the first, I think, tenant meeting that we've had that building has had in probably 2-3 years, and there were folks there that have been living there for 2-3 years, and they didn't even know that their building changed ownership, and so something that we've had to explain to tenants there. Also, it's their lease, right? So there's a new ownership, there's a switch of ownership, and then often what happens is that the new landlords are trying to figure out what they want to do with the building, if they want to get tax increment refinancing or something like that, and therefore they just don't renew a lease, and people don't know what's going on. They might get a higher rent all of a sudden without even having a new contract. So we see this quite often. This is the first building that we've been able to get a building meeting, but we're currently working 2, if not 3 other buildings that are going through the same exact thing at the same time, all here on the west side. So just having a notice is, I think it's a courtesy. I think it's incredible that we have to create an ordinance to have courtesies with tenants, and it changes people's livelihood. An additional $150 a month changes your whole life. And when you don't know why or how did this happen, you just know that you got a letter from someone new that you never met that says you got to pay me this much more now, without any advance. It's crazy, it's ludicrous. And so this is why I think this is very simple and it's necessary.
I also want to make a point to highlight that when it comes to renting, we do need landlords. I think that point may have already been made. This is a relationship that can't exist one without the other. Our city and our elected officials really are in a place of responsibility for balancing some of these things. So this crisis that we see and that we have on our hands have been years in the making. It's been happening to people of color for a long time. It's been happening to poor people for a long time. Now it's so out of control, it's affecting everyone else. It's affecting homeowners. The taxes are crazy and everyone's like, wait a minute now, I'm uncomfortable, I'm at risk. Now we're all paying attention, right? But this is not a new issue. Paying attention to what some of our representatives have talked about as far as what their priorities are and why they should have been elected into the positions of power that they're in are based specifically upon issues like this, based specifically upon housing justice, based specifically upon criminal justice reform, based specifically upon communities of color receiving equity, finally. But this is where the rubber hits the road, where things start to get real. And you have people who are more organized, their money is more organized, their power is more organized, and they are calling in their checks. You know what I'm saying? They are cashing their checks on their politicians. And so now it comes down to, are you going to do what you said that you were going to do? Or are you going to do what you're being paid to do? And so I really want to say that this is not about landlords being against tenants. In fact, we have to be very intentional about strengthening that relationship and facilitating that relationship. We should be talking to tenants about stewardship of where they're living. We should be talking to landlords about how these things can be seen as protection for themselves, and really look at who's responsible, who's really making the decision, who's behind the curtain. Is people who are telling you yes and telling us yes at the same time. Something's got to give, So there are 7 city council members in the city of St. Paul. Figure out who yours is. I know who mine is, and I will be hitting them up. Hit up your council member and let them know how you feel about this. Let them know that we need these protections and that you want to see them do the right thing.
Yeah. I want to go back to something that Danielle said about these tenant protections didn't come out of nowhere, right? They come from work that all of our organizations have been a part of, not just working with tenants and organizing folks, but also through the Anti-Displacement Policy Network, which has been, I haven't been a part of it for very long, so maybe Danielle can speak more about it, but really just meeting with cities across the country that are dealing with the same issues and trying to figure out what are the ways that we can create equity in our housing system and protect our renters from displacement, right? And so these policies have been uplifted as successes and tools and necessary pieces of our housing system across the country in all the cities that have participated in the policy network. And then for myself, I serve on the the City of Minneapolis's cross-sector implementation committee, which is just like a mouthy term for basically the committee of folks that are helping to implement the tenant protections that were passed in Minneapolis. And that's been a really eye-opening experience, right? Because we're sitting with landlords, we're sitting with housing providers, we're sitting with other advocates who want to implement these new policies in Minneapolis in a way that everyone understands, right? Tenants know what their rights are, landlords know what the processes are. And one of the things that I've learned in that is that St. Paul is listening, right? St. Paul is paying attention to maybe the flaws or the areas of improvement from Minneapolis's policy, and that's actually been built into the St. Paul policy. Like, as a policy wonk, like, I've read through the weird legal language of both policies, and I can confidently say that the St. Paul one, it makes improvements on areas that we at the cross-sector implementation committee have talked about, like a lack of clarity or areas of uncertainty in the Minneapolis policy. Like, those improvements have been made, and so I think to the city's credit, like, there's been learning happening not only across the country but across the river, and I think learning from all those experiences is really helping us get to a set of policies that, I mean, to us, are no-brainers, right? These are all things that should have existed a long time ago, but now we're being given the opportunity to do it in a way that is really well-informed, and we're in a really good position to pass a policy that is strong and makes sense and is proven by the success of the policy in other cities.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a good point, Tram. I think that we look at the city as like one big entity, and really there are so many individual departments and then people within there. So there are some people who I see putting in a tremendous amount of work, and it's complicated. And so we are on all sides talking to all people, wanting to be more intentional about hearing from landlords if there's some legitimate concerns, because we want this to work. We want it to work in order for it to work for tenants, it has to work for landlords.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we figure this out without falling into the politics of it?
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about profit margins.
Yeah.
I think this is about people. We're talking about families. We're talking about human beings.
Right.
And we want to work with landlords about how to have that discussion about other human beings, but not about the profit margin.
Not
Or
about
about
their
risk.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, renters being referred to as risk.
Yeah,
It really hurts me.
and no racist rhetoric either. Like, or maybe you don't realize how racist you're being by saying that, but it really is.
Yeah.
So
What do you guys? You guys are out there, kind of. I mean, you guys are doing the work with the people. What are you finding in terms of renters, and either feeling connected or disconnected from even knowing about these protections?
some people don't know. I think that there are a lot of people that are wrapped up in the day-to-day life where it's difficult to come to community meetings. Sometimes you don't even hear about them. How are these meetings being marketed?
Right.
If you are someone who has a bunch of little kids at home, or maybe even just one little kid at home, and it's just you and you're working maybe 2 jobs, how realistic is it for you to kind of tie in,
Right.
Sometimes it's
Right.
very difficult, which is why we try to branch out and do things like podcasts and stream on social media, so that we
Yeah.
can still share information without expecting people to always show up. And we know that that's a barrier.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of the information for me even comes from my direct sphere, my friends, myself, my personal experience.
Yeah.
Grassroots organizing is about being in community, and you just hear everyday kind of things, and you're able to bring that back. Your relationships inform
Right.
your work.
So, I mean, it's, there's a sense of responsibility amongst each other to carry out that message. But also, do you feel as though there needs to be a greater accountability on whether from a governmental agency or just leadership in general?
all sides. I feel like accountability is one of the strongest things that we can do to better ourselves as people. I really do think that there could be more accountability on the city, because when we talk about profit margins, that's landlord rhetoric, that's also city rhetoric. You know, like how can we increase our market values? And some of these officials who sit and talk about anti-displacement also want to see an increase in their market values, you know? So I think that there can stand to be more accountability on all sides of this issue. I personally think that most of that is with our city, where we fund the city. That's our money. Those are our tax dollars. Like, and it just goes into an abyss. You know what I mean?
I do think that the council members that happen to be property owners or happen to be landlords should be held accountable a little more, because they are directly working on the behalf of their profits to a certain extent. You know, you can't be making legislation that's going to impact you and try to make it well so that it impacts you well. You know,
Right.
And I mean, you can clearly, that we've seen that happen plenty of times. We see it happen both inside of this country and outside quite a lot. But I think what my point should be also in this is that if you're going to do that, don't sell it as the community wants to see this. Don't sell it as this is your base or your constituency saying that they want that. Just be straight up and be like, this is going to benefit me as a landlord. You know, at least give us the truth there. Because there's plenty of other landlords and plenty of other homeowners that are being open and being truthful about how this is going to benefit their profit. So they fit in that category, might as well just be truthful.
Right.
I think one thing that comes up for me in accountability is like, who are you accountable to, right? And there's so much conversation all the time when we talk about the housing system in general, but especially tenant protection, that's about unintended consequences, right? Like, what is if we know that this policy is going to benefit like thousands of people across our country, I think city council members and people who are against tenant protections like to bring up like the minuscule percentage of cases that might be, right, that might need an exemption. But those exemptions should not stop this movement for housing justice. Those exemptions can't stop thousands of renters from benefiting, because we ask about the unintended consequences of limiting security deposits, but we're not asking or even accepting the reality that is the intended consequence of a lack of ordinances around security deposit, right? That's keeping so many people out of homes. So if we're going to talk about unintended consequences, let's first acknowledge the intended consequences of our current housing system that have created this problem in the first place.
That's why I like talking with Tom, because that one needs a finger snap. That's really true.
All right.
So I feel like that's a great closing point.
That's cool.
I'm over it.
It just wraps up so well, and it explains, it like hits the point where it should be at.
Yeah.
Oh,
Email your
definitely.
city council members. They
For
need
sure.
to hear from us renters, because they're hearing a lot from folks who don't really fully understand the policies and are bringing up, those tiny exemptions, right? But we need to bring that message of like, these are the values. This is about housing justice. This is about equity in our housing system. So if you have a story, or you just want to email your council member and say, hey, this will help me, or maybe this wouldn't help me, but this would help people I love and care about in my community. This would help the city be a healthier, safer place for everyone. And if you have a story that you want to share for the movement and to show your support, reach out to one of us, and we would love to highlight that, uplift your story, and really uplift the people that make the city great, and uplift the stories that really show the need for the housing policies like these 5.
Yeah. Excellent. Anything you guys want to add in to close with? No?
Contact your council member again, just do it, and please let them know how important this is.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you guys for tuning in to the podcast today. However you're doing so, we appreciate it. Please share it with your friends and anybody who you think will find value in this content. That being said, like they said, contact your representatives, city council members. You want to get involved, contact any of your community organizations that represent the movements you're interested in. And with that being said, everybody have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon.